My dad tried to ruin my wedding and pretend nothing happened, so I exposed a secret he'd been hiding from everyone all along. I'm a 29-year-old guy named Henry, and I've been sitting on this for a while, but I think I need to get it out there. My life turned into a soap opera 6 months ago, and it's only gotten messier since then. It all started on what should have been the best day of my life, my wedding day. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. My wife and I had been planning the wedding for over a year. We wanted something simple but elegant, with a guest list that was mostly family and close friends. It was a June wedding, outdoors at this beautiful venue that we spent way too much on, but it was worth it, or so we thought at the time. The ceremony itself went off without a hitch. My wife looked incredible in her dress, the weather was perfect, and I honestly thought nothing could ruin the day. I was wrong, so wrong. Fast forward to the reception. My dad, let's call him Frank, has always been the loud, opinionated type. He's the guy who corners people at family gatherings with his hot takes and always has one drink too many. Still, I never expected what came next. The toasts were supposed to be a heartfelt part of the night. My best man gave a great speech, full of funny anecdotes and genuine love for my wife and me. Then it was my dad's turn. I was nervous, but I told myself he'd keep it short and sweet. Nope. He started off normal enough, talking about how proud he was of me and how he loved my wife. But then he veered into this bizarre rant about how I'd been a difficult child, how I never listened to him growing up, and how he thought I'd never settle down. People started shifting uncomfortably in their seats, but he didn't stop. He made a jab at my wife, saying she must have the patience of a saint to put up with me. He even threw in some commentary about our decision to have a small wedding, saying it was cheap compared to the big, extravagant parties our family is known for. It was like a train wreck, horrible, but you couldn't look away. My wife was squeezing my hand under the table so hard it hurt, and I could feel the heat rising in my face. I should have stopped him right then, but I froze. Before I knew it, my wife stood up and asked him to stop. That's when things went nuclear. Frank didn't take kindly to being interrupted. He snapped back at her, something along the lines of, "I'm just being honest, sweetheart." My wife wasn't having it and told him to sit down. They were full-on shouting at each other in front of everyone. My mom tried to step in, but by then the damage was done. People were whispering, some were leaving, and the staff at the venue were clearly uncomfortable. Eventually, the venue manager came over and asked my dad to leave. He refused, of course, and the argument spilled out into the parking lot. It ended with him yelling about how ungrateful I was as he stumbled into a cab. The rest of the night was a blur. My wife and I spent hours apologizing to guests and trying to salvage what was left of our reception. By the time we got back to our hotel room, neither of us had the energy to celebrate. We just sat there, staring at the walls, wondering how it all went so wrong. A week later, Frank sent me a text that was supposed to be an apology. It said something like, "Sorry if I ruined your wedding. I was stressed, and the drinks didn't help. Hope we can move past it." That was it. No acknowledgement of what he said to my wife or the scene he caused, just a half-baked excuse wrapped in a fake olive branch. For context, Frank has always been the kind of guy who thinks he can say whatever he wants, and people will just get over it. He's never gone this far before, though. My wife, understandably, wants nothing to do with him until he gives a real apology, and honestly, I don't blame her. But now, 6 months later, the rest of my family is piling on the pressure. It started with my siblings. They keep saying things like, "You know how Dad is, and you're being too harsh." My mom called me the other day, practically begging me to let it go for the sake of the family. She said Frank is devastated and just wants to move forward. To make matters worse, we recently got the professional photos back from the wedding. They're beautiful, except for the parts where you can see the tension in our faces or the empty seats in the background after guests started leaving early. Looking at them brought everything back, and I found myself spiraling into frustration all over again. Now Christmas is coming up, and Frank has invited us to the family dinner. He says it's a chance to reconcile, but my wife doesn't trust him, and neither do I, to be honest. I feel like I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. Half my family thinks I'm being petty, and the other half is quietly staying out of it. Meanwhile, my wife and I are still dealing with the fallout of a wedding day that should have been perfect. So here I am, turning to strangers on the internet. Am I wrong for refusing to reconcile until my dad gives a real apology? Or should I suck it up for the sake of family unity? Because right now, it feels like no matter what I do, someone's going to be mad. So, after a lot of back and forth with my wife and some very reluctant conversations with my family, we agreed to go to the Christmas dinner. I knew it was a bad idea the second we pulled into the driveway. The house was lit up like something out of a Hallmark movie, but it felt more like walking into a trap. When we got inside, my dad greeted us like nothing had ever happened. Big smile, arms open wide, acting like we were just there for a casual family get-together. He even tried to hug my wife, which she dodged by stepping around him to hang up her coat. The awkwardness was palpable, and it only got worse from there. The first red flag of the night came about 10 minutes in. My dad handed us a huge, elaborately wrapped gift and made a big deal about how much we were going to love it. Everyone else stopped what they were doing to watch us open it, which made the whole thing feel more like a performance than a gesture of goodwill. Inside was this ridiculously expensive espresso machine, the kind we'd mentioned wanting months ago but decided against because it was out of our budget. My wife and I exchanged a glance, and I could tell she was thinking the same thing I was. This wasn't a gift, it was a bribe. As we tried to politely thank him, one of my siblings chimed in with a snide remark about how we should be grateful and stop holding grudges. My wife stiffened, but stayed quiet, clearly trying to keep her composure. Meanwhile, my dad was beaming, like he'd just solved world peace with his gift-giving skills. Dinner wasn't much better. My dad kept trying to make small talk, asking us about work and casually throwing in comments about how he was so glad we could all be together. My wife barely spoke, giving curt, one-word answers that made it clear she wasn't interested in playing along. The tension was so thick you could have cut it with a knife, but my dad either didn't notice or didn't care. Then came the apology, or what he thought was an apology. In the middle of dinner, with everyone watching, he raised his glass and launched into this long-winded speech about how he was sorry if anyone felt hurt by what happened at the wedding. He went on about how he'd been under a lot of stress, how he'd had too much to drink, and how he hoped we could all move past it because life's too short for grudges. It wasn't an apology, it was a performance, and not a very good one. My wife pushed her chair back and stood up without saying a word. She walked out of the dining room and headed for the front door. My mom called after her, but she didn't stop. I sat there for a moment, stunned, before I finally snapped. I told my dad that he had no idea what an actual apology looked like, and that he'd ruined what should have been the happiest day of my life. I laid it all out, how he embarrassed us in front of our friends and family, how he refused to take responsibility, and how his half-hearted attempts to make things right only made things worse. By the time I finished, the whole room was silent. My dad just sat there staring at me, while my siblings and a couple of aunts started whispering to each other. Then came the accusations. Someone muttered that I was making a scene and ruining Christmas. My mom started crying, saying she just wanted the family to be together. My dad, of course, played the victim, shaking his head and muttering about how he tried but couldn't win with me. It was a mess. I grabbed our coats and left. My wife was sitting in the car, her arms crossed and her face set in that expression that tells me she's upset but trying not to show it. We drove home in silence, and when we got there, we finally started arguing. She said we never should have gone, and honestly, she wasn't wrong. But I told her I felt like I had to at least try for the sake of the rest of the family. Neither of us won that argument, but by the end of it, we agreed on one thing. We were done trying to fix this on my dad's terms. Later that night, my dad sent me a long email. It was basically a wordier version of his dinner speech, blaming me for blowing things out of proportion and claiming he was just trying to lighten the mood at the wedding. He ended it by saying he loved me and hoped I'd come around eventually. I replied with a single sentence, "I'm willing to consider family therapy if you're serious about fixing this." He hasn't responded yet, but at this point, I'm not holding my breath. My wife has made it clear that she's done unless he gives a real, heartfelt apology and actually changes his behavior. She's even said she'll cut him out of her life completely if he doesn't. I posted about the whole ordeal on Reddit, and the responses were a mixed bag. Some people told me to stand my ground and protect my wife, while others said I should find a way to move forward for the sake of family unity. Honestly, I don't know what the right answer is, but one thing's for sure, this isn't over. A few days after the Christmas dinner fiasco, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from my mom. She never calls late, so I figured something must be up. She started off talking in a low, almost conspiratorial tone, apologizing for how things went down at the dinner. She admitted that she felt bad for pressuring us to come, and said she knew my dad wasn't in the right frame of mind to make things better. It was the first time she'd acknowledged his role in everything, without trying to shift blame onto me or my wife. The next twist came from my younger sister. She texted me out of the blue, asking if we could talk. She told me she agreed with us that Dad was completely out of line and had been avoiding accountability for too long. She said she'd wanted to speak up at the dinner but was too nervous about how the rest of the family would react. It felt like a small victory, knowing I wasn't the only one in the family who saw how wrong this all was. Things didn't stay calm for long, though. I sent my dad an email following up on my suggestion for family therapy, hoping he might reconsider. His response was quick and brutal. "Therapy is a waste of time. We don't need a stranger to tell us how to talk to each other." That was it. No attempt to meet me halfway, just outright dismissal. I forwarded it to my mom, hoping she'd help convince him, but I didn't hear back. As if the universe wanted to pile on, I got an email from one of the vendors from our wedding. They were checking in to ask if we needed anything else, which would have been nice if it hadn't dredged up memories of that disastrous day. It's funny how something as simple as an email can send you spiraling. Meanwhile, my wife decided to share her perspective on Reddit. She wrote about how everything unfolded from her point of view, and the responses were overwhelmingly supportive. People validated her feelings and encouraged her to stand her ground, which seemed to give her a bit of relief. Still, it didn't change the fact that we were in the middle of a family drama that felt impossible to untangle. The real explosion happened when someone in the family stumbled across her Reddit post and shared it in the family group chat. Suddenly, my phone was blowing up with messages. Some siblings were furious, accusing us of airing dirty laundry in public. Others stayed quiet, probably not wanting to pick a side. It was chaos. At one point, one of my brothers even made a new group chat without us in it, which I found out about later when a cousin accidentally mentioned it. Amid all this, one surprising voice of support emerged. My aunt. She's my dad's sister and usually stays out of family conflicts, but she called me to say she was on our side. She told me she'd always known my dad could be difficult and encouraged me to keep setting boundaries no matter how much pushback I got. It was reassuring to have someone older in the family acknowledge the situation for what it was. On top of everything, work started to feel like a second battlefield. I'd catch myself zoning out during meetings, replaying conversations with my family in my head. My boss even pulled me aside to ask if everything was okay. I gave a vague answer about dealing with some personal stuff, but I could tell it wasn't the end of the conversation. Just when I thought things couldn't get more ridiculous, my dad posted one of his cryptic Facebook statuses. It said something like, "Some people don't know the meaning of family loyalty," with no names but plenty of implication. Of course, relatives started commenting, asking what was wrong, which only added fuel to the fire. I ignored it, but my wife was livid. She said it was just another example of him trying to control the narrative without taking responsibility. At this point, my wife and I decided we needed help navigating all this. We found a couples therapist who specialized in family issues and scheduled our first session. The therapist suggested focusing on what we could control and not letting my dad's behavior dictate our actions. It wasn't a quick fix, but it felt like a step in the right direction. Then my mom reached out again. She proposed a one-on-one dinner with just me and my dad, saying she thought it might help us work things out without the pressure of the whole family watching. I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face him again, especially after everything that had happened. Before making a decision, I turned to Reddit again, asking readers what they thought. The responses were overwhelming. Most people advised against it, saying my dad needed to show real effort before I gave him another chance. A few people suggested going but setting firm boundaries for the conversation. It gave me a lot to think about, but I still haven't made up my mind. For now, I'm focusing on keeping my wife and myself grounded. This whole thing has been draining, but I'm starting to realize that we can only control our own actions. Whether or not my dad ever steps up, I know where I stand. Despite the overwhelming advice from Reddit to avoid a one-on-one dinner with my dad, I decided to go. A part of me thought, what if this is the one chance to fix things? My mom had been relentless, saying she believed this meeting could be a turning point. My wife didn't love the idea, but she understood why I felt I had to try. So, I agreed, with the condition that this was just between me and my dad, no spectators, no interruptions. The dinner was set at a small, family-style Italian restaurant my dad loves. I showed up a few minutes early, hoping to settle my nerves. He arrived right on time, walking in like this was just another casual night out. As soon as he sat down, he kicked things off with a joke about kids these days being too sensitive. I froze for a second, trying to decide if he was serious. When I didn't laugh, he waved it off and changed the subject, but the tone for the night was already set. Before we even got through ordering, my mom walked in. She looked nervous, carrying this awkward smile, like she knew she wasn't supposed to be there. I asked her what was going on, and she stammered something about wanting to help mediate. My dad didn't seem surprised, which made it clear this was planned. That's when I knew this wasn't going to go well. The conversation started off tense but polite. My dad made small talk about work, the weather, and random family updates, but it didn't take long for things to spiral. When I brought up the wedding, he leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. like he was gearing up for a debate. He said the whole thing had been blown out of proportion and that I had set unrealistic expectations for how people should behave. According to him, he wasn't the only one at fault. Apparently, my wife and I were just as responsible for the tension that day. I tried to stay calm, but then he brought up my wife directly. He said she was too dramatic and had been turning me against the family since the wedding. That was it for me. I told him in no uncertain terms how much his behavior had hurt us, not just on the wedding day, but in the months since. I laid out everything, the passive-aggressive comments, the performative apologies, the refusal to take any real accountability. Our voices started getting louder, and I noticed people at nearby tables glancing over. My mom jumped in, trying to defuse the situation, but she only made it worse by crying and saying she just wanted the family to be whole again. My dad, instead of backing down, doubled down. He insisted his wedding toast had been taken the wrong way, and that he shouldn't have to keep apologizing for something that was clearly a misunderstanding. The argument was loud enough now that a server came by to ask if everything was okay. I knew this wasn't going anywhere, so I stood up, threw some cash on the table for my meal, and told them both I needed space. My dad called after me as I walked out, but I didn't stop. On the drive home, I texted my mom, telling her I didn't want to talk to either of them for a while. Later that night, my phone started blowing up. My dad had apparently shared his version of the dinner in the family group chat, framing himself as the victim. He claimed I'd attacked him out of nowhere and accused me of being disrespectful. One of my siblings jumped in to back him up, saying I was tearing the family apart by refusing to let things go. Others stayed silent, which was almost worse. When I got home, my wife was waiting for me. She listened as I explained what happened, nodding along like she already knew how it was going to play out. She reassured me that I'd done the right thing by standing up for us, even if it felt like everything was falling apart. It was one of those moments that reminded me why I married her. At our next couples therapy session, I told the therapist everything. She listened carefully, then said it might be time to set some non-negotiable boundaries. She explained that while reconciliation is a two-way street, my dad wasn't showing any signs of being willing to meet me halfway. She encouraged me to prioritize my own mental health and the health of my marriage over trying to fix a relationship that, at this point, felt one-sided. After the disaster of the one-on-one dinner, I spent weeks reflecting on everything that had happened. My therapist had encouraged me to set clear, non-negotiable boundaries, and it became clear that the only way to move forward was to go no contact with my dad. It wasn't an easy decision, but I realized I couldn't keep sacrificing my mental health and my marriage just to maintain a relationship with someone who refused to take accountability. To make things as clear as possible, I wrote a letter to my dad. It wasn't angry or accusatory, just a firm explanation of why I was making this decision. I outlined the conditions for reconciliation, therapy, a genuine apology to both me and my wife, and a willingness to take responsibility for his actions. I ended the letter by saying I loved him but couldn't have him in my life under the current circumstances. I sent the letter to my mom first, asking her to pass it along, since I didn't want to contact him directly. Two of my siblings reached out almost immediately after finding out about the letter. They surprised me by saying they supported my decision and thought I was doing the right thing. One of them even admitted they'd considered going no contact themselves because of how difficult my dad could be. The rest of my siblings, however, sided with my dad. They accused me of being cold-hearted and tearing the family apart. The group chat turned into a battlefield, with insults flying back and forth until I finally muted it. My mom called me the next day, begging me to reconsider. She kept bringing up the long-term consequences for the family and how much it was hurting my dad to be cut off. I stood my ground, explaining that I wasn't cutting him off permanently, just until he was willing to meet the conditions in the letter. She sighed and said she understood, but I could tell she didn't agree. Then came my dad's response, or lack of one. According to my mom, he read the first few lines of the letter before tossing it aside and calling it manipulative nonsense. He didn't even finish it. Instead, he doubled down on his victim narrative, posting another cryptic status on Facebook about disrespectful children and how he'd done nothing but try to love his family. That, of course, opened the floodgates for extended family to weigh in. Within hours, I was getting messages from aunts, uncles, and cousins telling me I was overreacting and should let bygones be bygones. A few of them took the passive-aggressive route, sharing memes about forgiveness and tagging me in posts about cherishing family. It was exhausting, but I ignored most of it. My wife reminded me that these people didn't know the full story and were only hearing my dad's side. Meanwhile, my wife and I were growing stronger through all of this. We'd started couples therapy as a way to navigate the fallout, and it was helping us communicate better and stay united. On our first wedding anniversary, we decided to celebrate in a small but meaningful way. We reflected on how far we'd come since the wedding disaster, grateful that we'd managed to keep our relationship intact despite everything. Just when we thought things were starting to settle down, my dad showed up unannounced at our house. It was a Sunday afternoon, and we were in the middle of binge-watching a show when the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw him standing there, arms crossed, clearly expecting to be let in. My wife immediately tensed up, whispering that we shouldn't open the door. I cracked the door open just enough to speak through it and asked what he was doing there. He said he wanted to talk, insisting that this couldn't wait. I told him I wasn't comfortable having this conversation without the boundaries we discussed. But he kept pushing, saying I was being ridiculous and that we needed to sort things out like men. When he refused to leave, I told him I'd have to call the police if he didn't step off the property. He scoffed, daring me to do it, so I did. It wasn't an easy call to make, but I felt I had no other choice. When the officers arrived, they calmly asked him to leave, and he eventually complied, muttering under his breath the entire time. The whole thing left me shaken, but my wife reassured me that I'd done the right thing. The family group chat exploded again after that. My dad, of course, painted me as the villain, claiming I'd humiliated him in front of the neighbors. One of my siblings called me heartless for involving the police, while another said I was taking things too far. I didn't bother responding. At this point, it felt like arguing with them was a waste of energy. In therapy, my therapist validated my decision to enforce my boundaries, reminding me that I wasn't responsible for my dad's behavior or how the rest of the family chose to react. It was a relief to hear, and it helped ease some of the lingering guilt. It had been months since I went no contact with my dad. Things had finally started to settle down. The family group chat had gone quiet, probably because I wasn't responding, and my wife and I were focusing on building a peaceful, drama-free life. Then, out of nowhere, a handwritten letter from my dad showed up in our mailbox. The envelope had my name on it, and the handwriting was unmistakably his. I hesitated before opening it, half expecting it to be more of the same blame-shifting nonsense I'd grown used to. But as I started reading, I realized this was different. The letter began with an actual apology. Not one of those sorry if you felt hurt apologies, but a real acknowledgement of his behavior. He admitted to ruining my wedding and said he deeply regretted how he'd handled things since then. He didn't try to justify himself or shift the blame. He wrote about how he'd been reflecting on his actions and how much it had hurt him to see our relationship deteriorate. It was surprisingly heartfelt, and for the first time in this entire mess, it felt like he might actually be taking responsibility. I showed the letter to my wife. She read it quietly and then handed it back to me. Her advice was simple: take my time deciding how to respond. She didn't push me one way or the other, just reminded me that whatever decision I made, we were in this together. Word of the letter got out faster than I expected. One of my siblings must have known about it because within a day, I was getting texts saying things like, "See, Dad's trying. Why can't you just forgive him?" It didn't help that someone in the family decided to share the details with our extended relatives, reigniting the same old arguments. Once again, I was painted as the unreasonable one, refusing to give an old man a break. I brought the letter up in therapy, where we dug into my conflicting feelings about reconciliation. On one hand, the apology seemed genuine. On the other, I couldn't ignore the years of behavior leading up to this point. Was this really a turning point, or just another attempt to smooth things over without real change? My therapist encouraged me to take things at my own pace and focus on whether reconnecting would align with my own healing process. For weeks, I didn't respond. My mom called to tell me how relieved she was that my dad had finally apologized, but of course, she couldn't resist adding that I shouldn't hold on to the past and risk losing more time with him. I stayed non-committal, unwilling to make a decision until I felt ready. While all this was happening, I hit a major milestone at work. I got a promotion I'd been chasing for years, which felt like a validation of all the effort I'd been putting into focusing on myself and my goals. My wife and I celebrated quietly, just the two of us, grateful for a moment of joy amidst all the family drama. Then came the second letter. This one was shorter but just as sincere. My dad acknowledged that words alone wouldn't fix anything and said he was willing to attend therapy if I was open to it. He asked for a chance to prove that he was serious about changing. It wasn't the grand gesture I'd imagined, but it felt like a step in the right direction. This time, I didn't ignore it. I talked it over with my wife and my therapist, both of whom encouraged me to proceed cautiously. I decided to set strict conditions. The therapy sessions would be on neutral ground, and I wouldn't commit to anything beyond an initial meeting. My dad agreed without hesitation, which was surprising in itself. I turned to Reddit for advice, curious about how others had handled similar situations. The responses were a mix of encouragement and caution. Some people warned me to stay guarded, sharing their own stories of being burned by family members who pretended to change. Others said they believed in second chances, especially when someone was willing to put in real effort. The debate gave me a lot to think about, but ultimately, I knew this was a decision I had to make for myself. The first therapy session with my dad was tense but productive. The therapist helped steer the conversation in a way that kept things from escalating, and for once, my dad actually listened instead of trying to dominate the discussion. He admitted that his behavior at the wedding and in the months after had been selfish and harmful. It wasn't easy to hear him say those things, but it was a step toward accountability. We left the session without any grand resolutions, but there was a sense of cautious optimism. For the first time, it felt like there might be a path forward, not guaranteed but possible. I'm still prioritizing my own well-being and the stability of my marriage, but I'm willing to see where this goes, one step at a time.